Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And I hope that you're having a lovely day today. I hope you had a lovely weekend. And I hope that you enjoyed all the unnecessary drama over the weekend, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I also talked about it yesterday on Pagan News and Friday on the weekly roundup. Because I'm amazed, dismayed, and delighted at the same time. It's a fascinating story, but it's also extremely indicative of many things I've been talking about. And as you know, if you regularly follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they'll appear here in my chat room. So, for those who are not familiar, the opening ceremonies of the Paris Olympics included a wide range of interesting things. I understand it was rather disjointed. Rather avant-garde, which is not a surprise. Included a cabaret-style performance by Lady Gaga, a diva-style performance by Celine Dion, a mechanical horse-riding version of the goddess Sequana, and a tableau of the Feast of Dionysus. Together with a river procession of all of the athletes and so forth. And out of all of this, the tableau of the Feast of Dionysus apparently greatly upset mostly American Christians. I'm under the impression from everything I've heard that Europe, including European Christians, are somewhere between puzzled by and amused by the response. But large numbers of Christians felt that this was making fun of Da Vinci's Last Supper painting. And at first you saw all kinds of Christian outrage about this. And then, a little later, you started seeing all of the educational memes about how, no, this was actually the Feast of Dionysus. And it would seem to me, from what I've seen of it, that this should have been pretty obvious. Center to the tableau is a man painted blue, draped in vines, on a platter full of fruit, singing the I guess, hit French song Nude, which he basically is. And I don't know how you'd mistake that for Jesus. But they certainly did. And hello to Antonio in the chat room. And there are a few things to say about this. One of the things I'm seeing today, and of course today the internet is full of people who actually are posting parodies of the Last Supper, because there are thousands of them. People have been parodying that painting for years. But one of the memes I saw today that I thought really kind of summed it up is that to make this mistake, and hello to Janet in the chat room, you not only need to not have a very good background in art history or world history, but also not a very good background in the Christian religion, because there was virtually no recognizable Christian symbolism in this. According to the art director who actually put it together, it's based on a painting called The Feast of Dionysus from 1635 by Jan Hermens van Bielaert. And this is in the museum in Dijon in France. And apparently this was fairly recognizable to many people with a history in art and knowledge of actual history, but not too conservative Christians. I also want to point out that not only is there this particular famous painting of the feast of, this particular painting is the Feast of the Gods, but there's an entire genre of the Feast of Dionysus paintings from the Baroque era. It was a common subject. There are a bunch of them. And it's interesting to see that the Christian nationalist movement is so desperate to be offended that they seem to be reaching for straws for things to be offended by. And that's part of what I want to talk about today. This business of being drastically offended by things, while I'm sure there's some emotional truth in it, is also a political tool to force people to bend to your will, to force people to consider your feelings before their own for fear of offending you. We saw this years ago with radicalized Muslims, and hello to Arlene in the chat room, who used this kind of offense to frighten people of other religions. Hello to Mary Cavalcante in the chat room. And I think we need to pay attention to that comparison. And, if you're my age, or even a little younger, you'll remember years ago there were a series of Scandinavian cartoons that actually were critical of the Islamic faith, that led to huge protests and death threats and so forth. And at the time, all of the Christians said, we'd never behave that way. This is why Muslims are bad. We would never do that. And here they are doing it. I think we need to pay attention to how much the Christian dominionist / Christian nationalist movement strongly resembles the same developments in radicalized Islam several decades ago. And we need to be paying attention. This is only the first part of the drama that so far has unfolded around the Paris Olympics. The other one was, of course, the sabotage of France's train systems on Friday, I believe. And not just in one place, but in several parts of the country. There were terrorist attacks that shut down the nation's train system to prevent people from getting to Paris. And when I reported on this on Friday, there had been one arrest, but since then there have been at least 250 arrests in France and elsewhere. And I noticed this is not getting very far into the news. You have to know where to look to see it. But apparently, French and Western European authorities are expecting a major attack on Paris during the Olympics, and they're doing everything they can to prevent it. And of the 250 people who have been arrested because of this attack on the train system, about half of them have ties to Russia. And this is relevant for a number of reasons. And I want to go back to what I was just saying about how this strongly resembles, in my mind, the radicalization of Islam several decades ago. And that we need to watch where that went to know where this is intending to go. But one of the things that powered the radicalization of Islam was the influence of an outside agitator. And in that case, the outside agitator was the United States, which, because of the existing religious conservatism here, chose to back religious conservatives there, not realizing the direction it was going to go. And our fingerprints are all over the radicalization of Islam, which later, of course, became such a weapon against us. And, I have to say, to some extent, we deserve that since we built them. But in this case, again, there's a major outside player who seems to be backing a lot of this, and that is Russia. We see this in so many different places, and we should be paying attention to it. It is said that Vladimir Putin is deeply resentful of the role the US played in the collapse of the Soviet Union, a role that no one disputes because we bragged about it to anyone who would listen, that we basically pushed that nation down, which we'd been trying to do for decades. Nor am I saying that's necessarily a bad thing, just it's not in dispute. And now some of its heirs seem to want the same for us, which is no surprise. But we need to be mindful of it. We need to remember this and to have some healthy skepticism on anything involving that power when we know they have this issue. When it's well documented they have this issue, and when it's kind of obvious that they would. For Putin and a number of Russians, what we thought of as liberation was actually destabilization. And they don't necessarily see it as the good thing we saw it as. And we need to bear in mind that there's a grudge there. And that just as we once were foolish enough to help radicalized Islamists to fight against Russia, which is the reason that we built and armed them in the first place, they appear to be doing the same thing now with radicalized Christians against us. And part of what that means, and this is part of all my talks about Christian nationalism and Project 2025 and everything else, is that in addition to being an actual native movement here, which it is, long predating any such alliance, it also is acting at least in concert with foreign powers who mean us no good in this country. And we need to be mindful of that. We need not to think this is just a bunch of silly people. One of the things I keep seeing online is people attacking whatever politician they don't like as being an idiot. I have to tell you, no one rises to the level of national government while being an idiot. It does not happen. There was a wonderful film back in 1979 when I was young and dinosaurs ruled the earth called Trading Places, about a gardener named Chauncey, who was, but Chauncey kind of describes it. But Chauncey was mentally disabled, but gave off this era of absolute innocence, which he in fact possessed. And he happened through a series of strange coincidences to be mistaken for the now deceased man who had previously employed him. And this propelled him through a variety of circumstances into the White House with his barely understanding what was happening. That was a great movie. It doesn't happen in real life. I mean, there are a number of politicians that you can, in my opinion, describe as idiots, as long as you're not dumb enough to think they are, because they wouldn't be there if they were. They may be vile. They may be reprehensible. They may be very wrong-headed, but they can't get to that place if they're idiots. And I think a lot of people really underestimate the situation that the world is in, because, I talk about this in the context of the United States because that's where I am, but it's a world problem. We're seeing it everywhere. And I mentioned that of the 250 people arrested in France and around France for involvement in this attack on the railways, that many of them have ties to Russia. But many others, including some of those with ties to Russia, have ties to the conservative, radicalized far-right party that just lost the recent election. And it certainly appears that they're attempting to bring violence into the situation, something we're hearing politicians in this country threaten on a daily basis. We need to look at this and realize this is not an empty threat. Um, it is a very real thing. And what do we do about that? Well, for ordinary people, there's not much we can do except get out and use the tool we have, which is voting and talking to people about the nature of the situation. Is that going to be enough to make a difference? Well, we're going to find out. In the long run, there may be more things we can do. Um, but we need to vote. And I'm not going to say we need to vote for any one party or any one candidate, but we do need to vote against Christian nationalism wherever we see it. For those of us who are not Christians, because it will destroy us. It says right up in the full-sized print that it plans to destroy us, and there's no reason to question it. We do not have a place in their world. And not only are they pretty open about that, but any examination of history when similar movements have come to power will tell us that this is going to happen. How bad it will happen, how extreme it will be, that's always a question. But they're certainly showing a lot of extreme behavior. So, to me, that is the main thing to take away from all of this nonsense about the Olympic opening ceremonies and the terrorist attack that's already happened, and others that may. That it has significance far beyond Paris. And, the people being offended by the opening ceremony, well, some of them are probably innocent of any ulterior motive, but I think that their offense was deliberately cultivated and deliberately exaggerated, perhaps through no fault of their own. And one of the points I made the other day, and I'm going to make it again, is that we should be afraid of these people. We should resent their behaviors and attitudes. We totally should. But we can't entirely blame them for one reason, and that is that they've been raised this way. A good couple of generations now have been raised with only this narrow scope of understanding, only these narrow symbolisms, only this narrow understanding of anything. If they were finding revelationist symbolism in the opening ceremony, which is what they made of the goddess Sequana, which has nothing to do with it, but they don't know the goddess Sequana. They don't know anything but a very narrow set of symbols, and they therefore assume everyone else is speaking in the same one. This is why when you read Project 2025, eliminating the Department of Education is a high priority for them. They want their children to have a very narrow education and very narrow references. It makes them easy to control and allows them to build up these exaggerated responses, this exaggerated outrage constantly. And that's the point. And Mary Cavalcante in the chat room says, I was raised that way and managed to escape. I've known a number of people who would say the same thing. This is a gigantic danger to the future. Because those people who are offended here really think they're right because they don't know what they don't know. They have no other references. And, any educated person watching this would never have reached these same conclusions, but they are not educated people. And there's a huge effort on the parts of the people running the Christian nationalist movement to make sure they stay uneducated and to expand that as far as they can, and to make sure the only references they have are conservative Christian references, so they cannot reach any other conclusions. And I think that's certainly a kind of child abuse, personally. I think it's very objectionable. And also, I think it's going to be very hard to fight. But we must fight it. And, as we read that Project 2025 thing, eliminating any outward source from which their children can learn anything that goes against this narrow frame of references is of major importance to them. And we hear this in news stories all the time. They don't want their children exposed to other ideas. And this is what comes of that. Because these people were not exposed to other ideas, they didn't know what was really going on. They had no reference for what was really going on. And imagine that in a more important circumstance than just being upset over a tableau vivant at a ceremonial occasion. It is really very frightening when you think about it. And I think one of the things that's going to be most important in coming years is figuring out how to break that, how to get these young people to have a wider range of references from outside of their community. And it's not going to be easy. But the idea of just leaving it alone is, in my opinion, suicidal. We need to be very much concerned with what they're doing and do everything that we can to build a wider, more open-minded world, no matter what they're doing. And it's not going to be easy. Now, there are a lot of people who are doing that, but we need more. Now, I will say that there are some other things that can be said about this, and one of the ones I found most interesting, I saw a prominent person commenting this morning who seems to think that this actually was about the Last Supper, but also is pointing out that there was a lot of LGBTQ symbolism in the opening ceremony, and a reference to the Last Supper would make perfect sense in that context because Leonardo da Vinci was gay. He had no female romantic relationships during his lifetime. He is one of the few historical figures who certainly appears to have been gay in more or less the modern sense, and did not hide behind a fake marriage or fake relationships, and was fairly well known at the time. So all these people being so upset about LGBT themes around the Last Supper are kind of missing a kind of important point about it, which is where it comes from, which is kind of important, I think, to remind them of, even though it was not the Last Supper. The Last Supper does not have Dionysus in the middle of the table. The other thing that I wanted to remark upon is that part of the problem here is also the coverage of the Olympics by NBC. And I was not watching this, which would not surprise anyone who knows me. I do find the openings of the Olympics interesting to watch, and I usually watch them later on YouTube. I think the best of all openings of the Olympics in my lifetime was in 2004 at the Olympics in Greece. And if you have not seen that, I recommend that you YouTube it. It is a very dramatic recreation of the entire history of Greek culture up until the present day in the form of one large tableau vivant. Beautifully done. And meaning no offense to Paris, but way better done than this one. But when I saw this story, I tried to find coverage of what was offending people, and it was very hard to find. It was ultimately Karen Bierhoff from the St. Louis pagan community who published a link ultimately to where I could actually see it. It may be getting out farther now, but the big question for me was, why was it so hard to find? And what I'm understanding is that NBC pulled away from this before it got very far into it. And therefore, a lot of people didn't actually see the performance. They only saw the very, very first bit of it. There was also a French language narration that they did not bother to translate. And this may have helped them to reach the wrong conclusions. And why did they do that? Because they assumed that the American audience was too puritanical to see the performance. And they were probably right, but they were also, in my opinion, very wrong because they made the situation worse. And the reason I think they thought that it was going to be uh, an issue was very different from what actually happened. But if you've not seen it, what they did is, the god Dionysus arises from a platter of fruit to sing the song Nude, which apparently is rather popular in France at the moment. The actor playing Dionysus, or the performer playing Dionysus, is the singer who's had a hit with this song, which apparently he normally performs in the nude. And maybe they thought that's what he was going to do. As it is, he was wearing a G-string and some vines. And obviously they thought that Americans were not mature enough to see this. They're probably right, which is a huge slap in the face to our country, but probably right. But it furthered the confusion by the fact that people thought they had seen something without actually having seen the actual performance. Because I gather all they saw were the other performers gathered in front of the runway, which looked a bit like a table, and reached their own conclusions. And, one of the things I'm seeing a lot these days on social media are all sorts of words being censored that would never have been censored in my day and should not be being censored now. Very ordinary words like died. If you're talking about history, how do you not mention someone died on such and such a date? But you have to have little asterisks in the word, apparently, on many platforms. Or you use a word like unalived, which is ridiculous. Lots of other words are being blanked out because of this excessive Puritanism, which apparently is spreading all over the place. And I have always objected to this. I think our entire pagan movement has always objected to this, and we need to start objecting again quite loudly. And hello to Rachel Brady in the chat room. It's good to see you, Rachel. And Rachel says, great talk on this. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate this. I sometimes think I'm droning on a bit much about these things. But I do see people saying that they're enjoying it. And I hope that continues to be the case. But, rather than seeing a decrease in Puritanism and censorship during my lifetime, I've seen us go backwards. The things that were easily permissible when I were young would now offend great numbers of people who, in my opinion, probably should be slapped upside the head, because so much of this is just plain silly. What do you mean you can't look at the word died? Or the word suicide, which they also have to blank out, or the word vagina, which, when I was young was considered the polite word to use. How immature are these people? This is ridiculous. How can you deal with life when you are being insulated from this much of it? I don't think this is good. And I think it leads and is a result of this kind of manufactured outrage. And Arlene says, I so agree with you. Thank you, Arlene. Now, how do we get from here to a place where people can be more honest? I'm not sure. It's one of the many things we need to work on. And speaking of working on these things, yesterday we announced a new book from Corellian Publishing called The Witch Wars Defense Manual, Volume 2, How to Win. And if you have not seen this already, it is available for pre-order at CorellianPublishing.com. It has an ETA of October 31st. You'll find it being advertised on various of our platforms. And, it will be talking about some of the things we can do, some of the things we perhaps should do. And I highly recommend it to you. It is written by the quote, most dangerous man in pagandom, end quote, Ed the Pagan, my frequent guest on this program, and is a sequel to certainly the most infamous book in the pagan world, the Witch Wars Defense Manual. Now, Arlena says, what about Volume 1? And, I believe it's fairly easily available as a free PDF. If you cannot easily find it, we can probably find it for you. I know at least one crazy woman has been accosting perfect strangers on the internet to give them free copies of it. And if you know, you know. So we figured, if somebody's going to advertise the book that way, it's time for the sequel. And it will be certainly as controversial as the first one, and also as helpful. Because the Witch Wars Defense Manual was about all the techniques that people, particularly in that time, because this was 20 years ago, but still, that they use in witch wars, that people weren't necessarily always aware of, and ways that you can counter them if you happen to be attacked in that way. And this manual will be doing much the same thing. And I cannot too highly recommend it. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour and even gone a little over it. But I hope you've enjoyed the broadcast. I hope you join me again tomorrow. And I want to say that I love spending this time with you. I love the fact of having people talk with me directly. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to keep our eyes open to everything that happens around us, to all those good and wonderful things in the world, and also to those things which might be a threat to us. Help us to find good and positive ways to respond to those threats and to take the danger out of them. Help us to build always a better world and to move forward. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and knowing you're always with us. Still, from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always. I thank you.